With David Edwards' future in Buffalo uncertain, what's the plan at left guard? I have plenty of ideas that I'm going to share with you right now on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate you all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, folks, welcome in. End of last week, we had a big conversation about the plan for the Bills at center. Of course, Connor McGovern set to be a free agent, and so the Bills got to come up with the right plan at center. Well, similar story at left guard, where David Edwards, who's handled the job for the last 2 seasons, he's set to be an expiring contract, and there's a lot for the Bills to sort out there, whether it's to bring back David Edwards or consider an in-house option. There are several outside players that I think are worth discussing. In fact, 15 of them. I'm going to discuss 15 outside options for the Bills to add at left guard. So we got a lot to cover today. Let's dive into it. And first, talk a little bit about David Edwards, who the Bills signed in 2023. And his first season in Buffalo, he was like the jumbo tight end. And then his next 2 seasons, he started at left guard. He's 28 years old. He turns 29 in March. And the Bills, after bringing him on a 1-year minimum type deal, signed him to a 2-year, $6 million contract, and now that is expired. And like I said, he's been the starter for the last 2 years. I think he, in 2025 especially, was terrific. Consistent player. He's a technician, super smart, a guy that played quarterback in high school. He went to Wisconsin to play tight end, makes the switch to right tackle, and then his home in the NFL has been at guard. But point being is he's played a lot of positions. His background as a quarterback really sets him up to have a really big understanding of what everyone does. And so it's not just that he's a good player, it's the football IQ that he brings to this offensive line that also matters quite a bit. And he's huge for the communication element between the O-line and, of course, the skill players as well. And so his story in the NFL is a good one for him in some ways. I mean, he was a 5th-round pick out of Wisconsin, and he was an instant starter for the Rams, who drafted him. And Aaron Kromer was his offensive line coach when he was first drafted, and he was a starter for his first 3 seasons. And then in year 4, of course, he's a starter once again. You think he's on a path to being a fixture for the Rams for a long time, and then he has a concussion in his 4th season that kind of keeps him out for almost the entire season. And then he eventually follows Aaron Kromer to Buffalo, and the story there. And so the point that I'm making by kind of getting into his story is that he has positioned himself very well to get a big contract. And it's one that I'm sure he's feeling like he's earned based on the way his career started with 3 years as a starter. Then the 4th season's kind of a lost one. His 5th season, he's a utility blocker for the Bills. And then he comes into that starting lineup for 2 years and does a good job. And because of that, I think his market is going to price him at a point where it's going to be tough for the Bills to keep him. Spot Rack estimates David Edwards gets a contract in the range of $20 million a season. Pro Football Focus has it at $11.6 million, which is a pretty big gap. But point being, even if it's on the low end of that, it's going to be an expensive deal. And as we've discussed, the Bills have a lot of needs. Last week, we spent an entire podcast creating Brandon Beane's to-do list. And there's a lot of big primary needs. And the point is, you cannot invest significantly to fill every hole. You need to have economic options. And guard is a position where you should think about your economic options, right? Like, it's not a premium position. It's an important position. I would say any position on a football team is important, but it's not a premium position where the Bills have needs at premium positions like edge rusher, wide receiver, even center, I would say, is a bigger position of importance in the NFL. And so this does feel like the type of spot where you would want to find an economic option. And so on this podcast, I'm going to give you a lot of economic options, and then we'll kind of finish with some of the bigger contract options. But, I think this is probably a spot where the Bills will try to find some value, but still find the impact that they're looking for. Part of what complicates this situation, it's not just that David Edwards has once again proven himself as a good starter in the NFL. It's that the guard market, very much like we talked about end of last week with the center market, it has really surged. And the top of the guard market, you now have Tyler Smith with the Cowboys at $24.5 million a season. Trey Smith with the Chiefs, $23.5 million a season. You have Landon Dickerson, who's with the Eagles, Chris Lindstrom with the Falcons, Quentin Nelson with the Colts, and Robert Hunt with the Panthers. They're all over $20 million a season. And so the top of the market has really went up. And then you saw some big time contracts handed out last year in free agency to players that are good, but not necessarily like top of the line players like Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks signed for $19.25 million last offseason with the Packers. Will Fries signed for $17 million a season with the Vikings. Jonah Jackson, same type of thing with the Bears, $17 million. And those are players that I would argue are in a similar like tier of quality player as David Edwards. And I think that's where you're seeing the high end of those projections pushing $20 million for David Edwards. And so I think he's going to be tough to keep. And for him, I think he's positioned himself really, really well to earn a big contract. I'm just nervous it's not going to be with the Bills. And so therefore you're left looking for a replacement. Now that replacement could come in-house. And I want to now turn our attention to some of those in-house possibilities. And then we'll get into some 1-year veterans, some sleepers, and then those bigger fish. But the news over the weekend was that Alec Anderson signed with the Bills, re-signed with the Bills. He's 27. He'll turn 27 in October. He was a restricted free agent, and that minimum tender was $3.5 million. And this contract comes in at 1 year, $3 million, with $1.8 million guaranteed. So the Bills got a little bit of a discount, if you will, based on what the lowest RFA tender was, which is something we've speculated on being a possibility in our conversations about that Alec Anderson to this point. And one thing I'll say about that 1 year, $3 million with $1.8 million guaranteed is that is not definitive starter money. That is money that is in the mix, right? For a depth role, maybe to start. But that's definitely not money that you look at and say, yeah, they signed him because they think he's a starter and they're going to pay him like that. Now, I will say this, while you can look at Alec Anderson as a potential option for the center job, I think he's a better candidate to play left guard than center. I think his temperament translates better to the left guard position more so than center. And when you watch Alec Anderson play, there's very likable traits. I mean, he's a tenacious run blocker. He's got some ability to create displacement. He's versatile. You could tell he brings an attitude to the table that I think the team really likes. The concern is that I just don't think he plays with consistent control, and you need to be under control to sustain blocks in the NFL. You need to be under control to be consistent in pass pro. And so that's kind of where my concerns lie with Alec Anderson. And so obviously, I'm curious to see, how he develops further and if he gets a chance to play extensively, what that looks like. I think ideally Alec Anderson is a reserve for you. I think you'd love to have him in a utility blocker role, in a, first off the bench type role at guard. But to think of him as an every snap player, I think that's a little aggressive, but obviously I think he'll get that opportunity potentially to show that that's what he can do. So Alec Anderson, he's back in the mix for 2026. And he figures to at least factor into the competition for the left guard or center job. Another player that I want to mention as a possibility for left guard is Tylan Grable, who was a 2024 6th-round pick out of Central Florida. He turns 27 in October, 3rd year of his rookie deal. I wish we got a chance to see him in the preseason last year. He had a concussion, so we didn't get much opportunity to watch him play. But as a rookie during the preseason and in some limited opportunities during the regular season, I thought he was terrific. I thought he was terrific in week 18 this past year. when he played against the Jets, when the Bills were resting guys. And I love the skill set. I love how he plays. I think he has starter potential. He's got really nice athleticism. I love his hand usage, really good with body positioning. The thing with Grable is getting stronger. And when you're projecting him to playing guard where, he's been a tackle, that's where that strength is really going to matter because everything happens a little bit quicker. And you gotta have the functional strength to absorb and redirect, right? And so that would be my concern with Grable. But I mean, obviously, I'd expect him to be working hard at his functional strength, and we'll see what that looks like for the 2026 campaign. I think at a minimum, he's the primary swing tackle, but I do think there's a chance he factors into the equation at left guard. I'll also mention Cedric Van Pran-Granger. I think he's more of a candidate for center than he is left guard. We talked about the lack of length that he has. That would be a bigger issue at guard than center. And so I sort of feel like Cedric Van Pran-Granger, if he's got a path to the starting lineup, it's more so at center. Just like I would say with Alec Anderson, if he's got a path to the starting lineup, I think it's more at left guard than center. But obviously this will play itself out, and we will see. But that's my perception on the in-house candidates to replace David Edwards. And of course, like I mentioned in the Connor McGovern discussion, none of these guys comes in as the assumed starter. These are players that would need, competition and to earn it. And part of what we'll do coming up next is to discuss some of those guys that would factor in as, good competition should the Bills kind of position one of these in-house guys to succeed David Edwards. All right, coming up next, 15 outside options that I think are worth discussing for the Bills at left guard. We'll break them all down next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a local trusted expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, I said I had 15 outside options that I want to kind of introduce to you. And I have them broken down into some different categories. So the first category we'll discuss are the one-year mercenaries, the kind of player that you bring in, you think they'll do a good job for one season, but you're not really interested in a long-term deal. Then I want to get into some sleeper-type candidates that you would sign with them competing with the in-house options in mind. And then we'll close it out with some of the bigger fish if the Bills do want to invest some money at the guard position, who some of those players could be. But I think these guys that we're going to talk about now are the most realistic. So let's get into some of these one-year mercenaries. First player I'll mention, Joel Bitonio. He's played his entire career at the Cleveland Browns. He turns 35 in October. So you see, that's why I'm saying this is not like a multi-year thing, but for 1 year it could be. So Joel Bitonio, 35 in October. He's basically started every game since 2017 for the Browns, 7 consecutive Pro Bowls, 2018 to 2024, 178 game starter at left guard. And he's been really good. I mean, there's a chance he's got a Hall of Fame argument. Pro Football Focus says 1 year, $4.5 million. SpotRack says 1 year, $12.8 million. So you have a massive discrepancy there. If that's closer to the 4.5, I think that's an option for one season. A veteran leader for sure. But if it's 1 year, 12.8, that's probably more than the Bills would want to pay. But, let's be honest, Joel Bitonio's played his entire year in Cleveland for bad football teams. You might want to take less and go on a bit of a Super Bowl run if he thinks the Bills are the type of team that can help him get him there. So Joel Bitonio, an option. How about this one? Kevin Zeitler turns 36 in March, 213 career starts. He's been a starter pretty much his entire career. His first 5 seasons with the Bengals, then 2 with the Browns, 2 with the Giants, 3 with the Ravens. And then he had 2024 in Detroit, 2025 in Tennessee. Rock solid football player that I think very much could fill the role of come start for a year and go on a run. Another player that, could be looking for that end of career type championship run. Pro Football Focus and Spot Rack both say 1 year, $9 million. So be a little bit expensive, but a guy that I think you sign him, you put him in there at guard, and you feel really good about what you have for a season. How about this guy? You've heard of him, Wyatt Teller. Turns 31 in November, of course, an original draft pick by the Bills. And he started 7 games with the Bills as a rookie. Then they traded him to Cleveland. He started 94 games across 7 seasons, made 2 Pro Bowls. He's over 100 starts for his career. He's had some injuries the last couple of years. In 2024, he missed 4 games with an MCL sprain. This past season, he went on injured reserve in Week 14 with a calf injury that ended his season. So there's been some injury stuff that has crept up. But when he's healthy, I mean, obviously he's proven to be one of the better guards in the league. Obviously, he's been a couple of years removed from playing in that caliber, but for one season, he can come in and potentially give you an answer. And maybe Brandon Beane would like that, right? In terms of getting a guy that he's admitted he let go too soon, get him back, and he can help you maybe at least for 2026. Pro Football Focus says 1 year, $3 million. Now, Spot Rack says 3 years, $30 million. Massive discrepancy, obviously, but if it is truly a 1 year, 3, 4, $5 million, you could see Wyatt Teller being an option. Here's another former Bill, Greg Van Roten. He turns 36 this week, actually. 105-game starter, pretty much a starter every year in the NFL since 2018, except for his one season with the Bills in 2022. And he's been a guard. So he's a guy that offers interior versatility, but he's mostly played guard. And his tenure as a starter, 2 years with the Panthers, 2 with the Jets. He was the Raiders in 2023, and then the last 2 seasons with the Giants. And he was a solid player for the Giants the last couple of years. Pro Football Focus says 1 year, $3.5 million. Spot Rack says 1 year, $5 million. Another experienced 1 year, get through it type player that I think could be reliable for you. And then the last 1 year mercenary that I want to mention is Dalton Risner. Dalton Risner turns 31 in July. He spent last year with the Bengals, was a 2019 second-round pick of the Broncos, and he basically started every game across 4 seasons in Denver. Then he went to the Vikings for 2 seasons, and then last year with the Bengals, he started 92 career games. I think his sizzle, his hot start to his career faded, a little bit quickly there. But one thing I hope that you've learned throughout the years of following the league is that, when regimes and coaches turn over, it's hard for guys to kind of stay in a spot, right? And I think that's kind of what's happened with a guy like Dalton Risner, where he's been a part of some turnover with some teams that he's been on, and that's kind of affected him from maybe stabilizing. But if you could tell me you're going to get him 1 year between $2.5 and $4.5 million to come in, maybe be your left guard, compete with some of your in-house options, at a minimum, provide some depth, I think there's value in that. All right, so those were like the 1 year veteran, some of those guys older, right? I gave you 3 guys 35 or older, 2 guys that are 31. These are very much like 1 year, handle the job, thanks for everything, type of situations. Kind of like what I think the Bills did this past year with a guy like Joey Bosa, like they've done. And I know that this isn't a success story, but like a Roger Saffold type player that would come in for 1 year. And obviously that didn't go well, but that doesn't mean the future ones can't go well. All right, let's talk about some of these sleeper options. These are definitely players that you don't sign and say, hey, you're the assumed starter, but to factor into that competitive mix with Alec Anderson and Tylan Grable, I think these would be some reasonable options. I'll reheat a player I talked about in the center discussion, which would be Ryan Bates, former Bills player that I think started 14 games one season for the Bills, with a lot of those at guard. He turned 29 earlier in February. Again, started 2 games for the Bears over the last 2 seasons. He knows Josh Allen. Remember the Rick Bates thing, versatility at a minimum was what he can provide, but he shouldn't be expensive. He's a guy with some experience and even some experience in Buffalo. Wouldn't mind him being brought in to factor into the competition and at worst be a versatile depth player. Another player I'll mention, Jamaree Salyer from the Chargers. He turns 26 in July, was a 2022 6th-round pick by the Chargers. He started his first 2 seasons, looks like he was going to be an answer. Then the last 2 years, he's been a reserve. And he has 40 starts in 4 seasons, 1,600 snaps at guard, 1,400 at tackle. So a guard tackle player Pro Football Focus says 1 year, 1.5 for the contract. SpotRec says 1 year, $1.8 million. So you get some value mixed with a little bit of upside and versatility with Jamaree Salyer. This one's really interesting to me. Cordell Volson, he turns 28 in July, was a 4th-round pick out of North Dakota State by the Bengals. He was the Bengals starting left guard for 3 seasons, his first 3 seasons in the NFL. Then this past year, he had a season-ending shoulder injury in August and missed the entire 2025 season. But a guy that started 48 games in his first 3 seasons, and then SpotRec says 1 year, $1.4 million. So again, you're looking for an economic option, a guy that's young, started, for 3 seasons. This wouldn't be a bad player to consider. Now, one thing about Cordell Volson and watching him through the years is that I think he's one of those guys that came in, performed at a sufficient level, and then just never really had much growth. And maybe the dynamics of the Cincinnati offensive line is something that plays into that, but he never really took that step. But I think there's some potential to unlock there. And then the last one I'll shout out is like a sleeper type guy is Tevin Jenkins. He turns 28 in March. He was a 2nd-round pick of the Bears in 2021 out of Oklahoma State. I loved him coming out of Oklahoma State. Started 42 games across his first 5 seasons, spent his first 4 years in Chicago, last year with the Browns. When he's on the field, he's really good. The problem is that he has availability issues. He's had back issues, I think calf stuff as well, that has kind of kept him from really, I think, stabilizing and locking down a spot. But when he's available, he's really performed well. SpotRec says 1 year, $2.3 million. PFF says 1 year, $2.75 million. So we're getting into this conversation, and I hope that somewhere along the way, something here sounds interesting to you, because I think the point that I want to communicate is that the Bills have options and a wide range of options that at least some of these should be economic and get you through a season at left guard. Of course, I'd love for the Bills to have the best left guard in the NFL. Trust me, right? Like, who wouldn't want that? But it's a limited resource environment, the NFL is. And so you have to allocate your resources effectively. And I think that highlights left guard as a position where, hey, you might want to try to get through that spot without having to, go crazy with a huge commitment or a premium investment. All right, so there's a bunch of options coming up next. If the Bills do want to go with a bigger fish, really put some money at left guard, and there's players, including one that has a lot of familiarity with the Bills' new offensive line coach. We'll tell you about that next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win a trip to the NBA Finals for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grabbing a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now not only can your pick cash, but it can also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so if the Bills do want to invest some money, some resources at this position, they have options. And, of course, not every one that I'm going to tell you about here is going to be a slam dunk, big money signing, but I think there's a chance they could be, and that's why they're in this segment. Now, of course, you could just simply start this conversation with David Edwards and say, hey, if you're going to pay a left guard, just pay the one that's been there the last few years. I certainly understand that logic. David Edwards is a good football player. My only reservation, and really my reservation with a lot of the players in this segment, is that how much you want to spend for this left guard, All right, let's get into it. I said there was a player that has a lot of history with the Bills' new offensive line coach, Pat Meyer. That would be Isaac Seumalo. Isaac Seumalo is a player that spent the last 3 years as a starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he turns 33 in October. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2018 by the Eagles, started 60 games in 7 seasons in Philadelphia. And then he signed a free agent deal with the Steelers, and he started 44 more games across 3 seasons. He's super consistent football player. Probably the most consistent player over the last 3 years of any guard that I'm going to discuss, including David Edwards. And has, like I said, mentioned that he's played with Pat Meyer the last 3 seasons in Pittsburgh. Maybe it's one of his guys. Now, what I find interesting here is that both PFF and SpotRack say 1 year, $8 million for PFF, 1 year, 9.6 for SpotRack. I think you can work with that. If you do a 1 year, $8 million deal and $4 million this year and a void year next year, that's a way to kind of get what you're looking for here. But Isaac Seumalo, a player that I think we should think very seriously about the Bills truly pursuing based on that relationship with Pat Meyer. And then, of course, what Isaac Seumalo has proven in the NFL, especially over the last several seasons. This next one's interesting as well. Risky, but interesting. I'm referring to Elijah Vera-Tucker, who has spent his entire career with the Jets. And you can convince me that someone's going to give Elijah Vera-Tucker all the money in the world. You can convince me that he's going to have to sign a 1 year prove-it deal. But Elijah Vera-Tucker was a 2021 first-round pick of the Jets. He turns 27 in June. Started 16 games as a rookie. But then after that, it has been a ton of injuries. He only played in 7 games in 2022 before a torn triceps cost him the season. Then he played in 5 games in 2023 and ruptured his Achilles. He came back and started 15 games in 2024, and then he missed every game in 2025 with torn triceps. So 3 massively huge injuries in the last 4 seasons. But when this guy is on the field, he is outstanding. He's an upper echelon player at guard. Injuries are the concern. So far in 5 seasons, he's played 43 of a possible 85 games. So that's a huge concern. Now, what's interesting is that PFF says $17.5 million a season. SpotRack says 12.8. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure the length is going to be there for Elijah Vera-Tucker. I mean, the injuries have been significant. I mean, I said 3 of the last 4. It's really 4 of the last 5. Torn triceps in 2022, the Achilles in 23. Good to go for 24. Torn triceps in 25. That's crazy. So, it is 3 of the last 4. There you go. 3 of the last 4 years. But point being, injuries have been a problem. And I think that's going to be the challenge with a team giving him a long-term deal. If he wants to come to Buffalo on a 1 year prove-it deal, sure. All right, let's talk about Zion Johnson, a 2022 first-round pick of the Chargers. He turns 27 in November. He started 65 career games at guard, 4-year starter for the Chargers. Again, not the general manager that drafted him, currently in LA. So obviously a player that you feel like could shake free. I think he's been a good, not great player. This is the number 17 overall pick in 2022 at guard. Like, expectations are high for a top 20 pick at guard. And I don't think he's quite met them, but I do think he's a serviceable starting player. Pro Football Focus says $12.75 million a season. SpotRack says 11.3. Want to mention Jermaine Illumineur. He's a player that's really come on later in his career, was a 2017 fifth-round pick of the Ravens. He turns 32 in December. He was a reserve for the first several years of his career, 2017 through 2021. He was a reserve with the Ravens, Patriots, and Raiders. Then starting in 2022, he's really turned into a good starter. At 2 seasons starting with the Raiders and then 2 with the Giants. Those 2 seasons with the Raiders, Bo Hardegree, the Bills quarterbacks coach, was with him with the Raiders. Now, most of his experiences come at tackle. He's played 4,865 career snaps. 4,291 of them have been at tackle, 547 at guard, and then 26 as like a jumbo tight end. So he's way more experienced at tackle than guard, but his skill set translates very well to playing on the inside. And I think as he ages, that'll be good for him. So I don't really get turned off that he's been mostly a tackle. I think he's a guard projection all day long. Pro Football Focus says $12 million a season. SpotRack says 8.7. Could this be a 2-year, $16 million player, something like that? $8 million a season. He'd be interesting to me. I think he's been very good the last few years. And the last 2 players I want to mention are 2 that I mentioned as part of the center discussion that I think could factor in at left guard, and it's Cade Mays and Dylan Parham. We talked about Cade Mays. He turns 27 in April, was a 6th-round pick of the Panthers in 2022, started 27 games across the last 4 seasons, 12 in 2025, 8 in 2024. And he's really settled in. He was a big-time recruit, 5-star that went to Georgia and Tennessee. Was a little uneven when you watched him in college, but you saw the skill and talent was very much there. It was just about becoming more consistent, and I think that has happened throughout his opportunities to develop and play in the NFL. Pro Football Focus says 1 year, 4.5. SpotRec says $12.3 million a season. And then Dylan Parham, a 2022 third-round pick of the Raiders. He turns 27 in August. He's been a starter all 4 years with the the Raiders. So it's 64 starts across 4 seasons. Big athletic dude coming out of Memphis. He has played both center and guard. In fact, like mostly guard. 3,800 snaps so far in the NFL, and only 219 have come at center. So he's played mostly guard. And so I'd be curious to see him come to Buffalo, be that left guard. He's got a lot of movement skills. Pro Football Focus says $13 million a season. SpotRec says $10 million a season. And then again, Bills quarterbacks coach Bo Hardigree was with him in Vegas 2022 and 2023. So there are options. I think that's the big thing to take away from this, is that it's a little bit concerning to think about, David Edwards not being around, but whether it's like good competition for some of the in-house guys, a modest free agent that they could bring in, a 1-year mercenary, I think this is a position where the Bills will be able to figure it out. And obviously we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. Some guys are going to sign extensions with the teams that we've already talked about, but I think there'll be something that works. It's just about being right and figuring out the plan. So there are options, and that's the good news. And so we've now covered a ton of receivers, a ton of centers, a ton of guards. And in our future conversations, we're going to start getting into the defensive side of the ball, edge rushers, nose tackles, Mike linebackers, safeties, all of that's coming. And then before we know it, we got one more week, which I'll do like a lot of my mock off-season stuff. We might get into some of the secondary needs, and then it's, the tampering starts, and there's going to be a lot of new players on the Bills, and we'll have a pretty good picture as to what this 2026 roster is going to look like. So much to discuss. I hope that you'll be here every step of the way. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.